3 games down for both the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens. And now, on a Canadian Thanksgiving edition of Penguins Hockey and Montreal Canadiens Talking, it's time for these two teams to finally meet. It's the Penguins and Sidney Crosby versus Cole Caulfield and the Montreal Canadiens on this edition of Penguins Pre-Show. Let's go. We interrupt this current program to bring you this new hockey show made for just the Pens fans around the world. Crosby has done it again! This is Pittsburgh Penguins Hockey on the Sports for Beginners podcast. Quick save by Jerry, and the Penguins lead will stay right where it is. Now here's the host of Penguins Pre-Show, Thomas McGregor. So make me a milkshake, Malkin. Happy Thanksgiving to all of our listeners on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. I am your host of Penguins Pre-Show. Penguins Hockey on Sports for Beginners features an exciting matchup for all of us to get ready for. So with that being said, welcome into Penguins Pre-Show as we get you ready for the Canadiens and the Penguins, scheduled to go at 7:30 at the Bell Center. Before we prepare for the Penguins and the Canadiens, do want to remind you also to stick with us for the Penguin post-game show following the game after the game goes final. We join our host of Penguins post-game, Scott McGregor, in the studio to break down what went down with the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins on this Canadian Thanksgiving showdown between Sidney Crosby and Cole Caulfield, which of course can be heard on the Penguins radio network 1059DX. That's 1059DX. Their radio show, pregame show, just about, I want to say, 2 hours from puck drop to get going. It's a 2 hour program that I'm probably sure is getting going in about a matter of moments from now, as right now on 1059DX, it's double M time with Mark Madden, the super genius. So shout out to Mark Madden for that. Bell Center be the venue of this Thanksgiving showdown. Prime, Sportsnet Pittsburgh, and RDS, and of course the radio network I mentioned for the Pittsburgh Penguins, 1059DX. Have you covered for the game itself. Join us on Penguins postgame after the game with Scott McGregor. But that aside, let's get you into how this show is going to work throughout the season. Before we get to how that's actually going to go down, let's get you the coaches that we'll be looking at Penguins postgame, as we do have a matchup decided for tonight's game at 7:30 Eastern Time, 6:30 Central Time, and of course in the Pacific Time, 4:30 Pacific Time. So 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, 6:30 Central Time, and 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time. So we're getting you set for that matchup, and the head coach's matchup, as we're going to reveal to you, is in Martin St. Louis and Mike Sullivan. Mike Sullivan for the Pittsburgh Penguins and Martin St. Louis for the Montreal Canadiens. If you're listening to this language in the French continent areas of sports for beginners, I'd like to gorgeously invite you and say bonjour, bienvenue. Welcome to the show. Our starting goaltending matchup has been revealed, but we're going to talk about that a little later on in the program as we get closer to puck drop. As we near puck drop, we're going to take a look at the games that have gone on since it was time to play hockey with the Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens. Also going to get a look at what is later in the program as that game gets underway. When we are finished, we're going to look at the matchups for the late game happening at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, featuring the New York Islanders and the Colorado Avalanche. Again, puck drop is at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll discuss that action before the show is up. The head coach is out of the way, though. Let's get you a look at how the show is going to be run. And as we get there, we're going to start with a little bit of a recap on where the teams are currently in this 82 game season. After a quick timeout, we're going to get you ready for the matchup between the Canadiens and the Penguins, and also give you a brief synopsis of what's been going on in the NHL currently. So it sounds like we're going to be talking about the action that went on today, but that's actually besides the point. We're going to also be talking about the up and coming opponents for both teams as we look at the up and coming opponents week that was as we look at the action from today. Then, as I mentioned, we'll do the starting netminders who have been revealed. So we will discuss the starting netminders. And I've also got some questions to ask you ahead of the game. Then I'll leave the show for the Penguins post-game host to bring us a special keys to victory portion of the program as he gets you ready for Penguins post-game. He'll give us his 3 keys to victory for a Montreal Canadiens victory or a Penguins victory tonight as we prepare to drop the puck. That a little later on in the program before we wrap up the show with my thoughts on how I think the game is going to go. Let's wrap up this opening portion of the program and talk about where the teams are currently. We did the head coaches, and that's going to be part of this portion of the program as we move on. Oh, I just forgot. Before we get to the keys of the victory at the end of the show, we'll provide you the information you need to know of when the next Penguins pre-show will be and how many pre-shows we're going to try to get in this season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Only available here on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Right, so you know how the show's gonna work. Now let's get into what we were trying to get into before I realized I forgot that we were gonna tell you when the next pre-show was. Let's start with you, Pens Nation. So go Pens go. Was a home opener to forget for most of us watching the Penguins take on the Rangers in the opener game of the season where they lost 6-0 in favor of the New York Rangers at PPG Paints Arena, hoping to get their revenge at the Square Garden, I'm sure, later in the season. Again, the score of that game, 6-0, Rangers take the first lead of the 3 meetings between the New York Rangers and the Pittsburgh Penguins. They'll be back meeting again at the Square Garden on Friday, December 6th. Look out for that game on your platforms when it comes to you after that game goes final. Note the start time, it's a 7:30 puck drop for that game. Speaking of wins and losses, before we get into the current game that just went down, and the Maple Leafs, of course, victors in that game 4-2 over the Penguins, would be not all damagey for the Pittsburgh Penguins as they managed to score 6 goals to the Red Wings 3 in the second of the back-to-back on Thursday, October 10th, 2024, leaving Mike Sullivan's Penguins with a record heading into tonight's game against the Montreal Canadiens at 1 win, 2 losses, and no overtime chances. At least not right now. They haven't went into overtime yet. Could they go into overtime tonight? We'll see. Anywho, kind of the same scenario with the Montreal Canadiens as we move into the first break of Penguins pre-show for the first time on Sports for Beginners. And that is a look at the Ottawa 4-1 victory on Saturday night, a 6-4 loss to the Boston Bruins on Thursday night, and a 1-0 victory to the Toronto Maple Leafs. This, of course, being the opener for the Montreal Canadiens as they opened it on a high note with a 1-0 win over the Maple Leafs on home ice and then lost 6-4 on the road. Came back to win at home 4-1. against the Senators. And of course, the 6-4 loss came to the Boston Bruins at the TD Garden. And now they welcome in the Pittsburgh Penguins, hoping to go at least 3-1 on the season. Already 2 W's and 1 loss. And again, just like the Pittsburgh Penguins, no overtime mentions yet. Will they go into overtime? Again, we'll see if that happens tonight, but we never know. Do want to cordially invite you to, again, like I mentioned earlier, join us after the game for Penguins postgame to talk about Martin St. Louis and Mike Sullivan. Maybe you'll get a postgame show that's like what we've had previously. Who knows? When we come back, we're going to do a little bit of thought process between the 3 games that the Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens have played. I'll detail who I think is doing a really good job with the Penguins this season. I'll detail who I think is doing a really good job with the Canadiens this season, in regards to where their season is at. And as we prepare to get into the final moments of the program, we'll hear from our words of encouragement from Scott McGregor for the keys to victory. Not before we've got the starting netminder matchup underway and got to the hockey action from Saturday night and Sunday night, along with today in Monday's action. It is 5:04 at the time of our Penguins pre-show recording, and when we come back, it's time to take a look at what happened from Monday, Sunday, and Saturday with the hockey action. But before that, let's get a little bit of a thought process within the 3 games being played by the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins as we prepare for Game 4 of 82 against the Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens, Game 1 of the 3 meetings they'll have this season in the 2024-2025 season. Penguins pre-show continues after this. Stay with us.
CNT Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down. Nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on CNT Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on CNT Radio.
Premiering right after the game on Sports for Beginners. Get ready, get set, Penguins fans, for Pittsburgh Penguins hockey post-game show. As Sidney Crosby and the players of Fifth Avenue in Pittsburgh get ready to hit the showers. It's Scott McGregor time with Penguins post-game, breaking down the game, the goal scorers to the penalty takers, and so much more. This is Penguins Hockey on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Penguins, Montreal Canadiens, with post-game on Sports for Beginners right after the hockey game. Let's go, Pens. The Pittsburgh Penguins are 2-1 on the season with 2 losses to their name, 1 W to their name, and that was the 6-3 victory over the Detroit Red Wings following the back-to-back that opened the season. Montreal Canadiens, however, are 4-1 victors over the Ottawa Senators and lead themselves with 2 W's and 1 L on the season at the hands of the Boston Bruins. This is Penguins pre-show on the Sports for Beginners podcast, and I am Thomas McGregor, your host of the program. Scott McGregor has you for Penguins post-game with the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins, which gets going at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and I've got you for the pre-show right now as we get you ready for the Penguins and the Canadiens. That's the topic of conversation right now, and that is the topic we're going to get into. We earlier mentioned the head coaches for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens in Martin St. Louis and, of course, Mike Sullivan. We haven't mentioned the goaltending matchups just yet, but we will get to the goaltending matchups prior to this next break. Before we get to the goaltending matchup at this point in the program, I do want to talk about how the action in the NHL has been going on right now. So let's get that over with, and then we'll talk about the feelings mutual between both the Thanksgiving competitors in the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens. Where I'm going to discuss where I think both teams have gone right and where both teams have gone wrong. I'm going to discuss what I feel about both teams and give you my thoughts on what really went down on Saturday night with the Maple Leafs and the Penguins. That's one of the games we're going to be touching on prior to puck drop. So let's get you a look at what's happened so far on the Monday slate before we get into the Saturday and the Sunday action. Let's get you caught up to slate. So the Boston Bruins, we mentioned they took a W over the Montreal Canadiens. Big shocker. Nobody probably cares, but I don't think it was a shock to most of us because they were playing their second of three meetings against the Florida Panthers. Excuse me, four meetings against the Florida Panthers, where they kind of actually showed up in this one a little bit better than they did when Florida beat them back on October 8th, the opener of the season for the rest of the NHL hockey teams when they lost to the Florida Panthers 6-4. They ended up losing this game close 4-3 against the Florida Panthers, who are the reigning defending Stanley Cup champions in regulation time. Of course, a game that did need overtime in this game was the Ottawa Senators and the Los Angeles Kings game, where both teams tallied not one, not six, not five, not four goals, not even three goals, not even two goals, not even six goals, but seven straight goals. We needed overtime, and the winning overtime goal was Josh Norris got the overtime victory and his second goal of the hockey game and second of the season, beating the Kings 8-7. The Kings on their way to Toronto for Wednesday night hockey, I'm sure, on their schedule that's coming up. Speaking of extra time or regulation, how about this? The Utah Hockey Club was undefeated, and now they are undefeated no more. As of today, they are now picking up their stuff and making their way to Anaheim for a hopeful fourth victory of the season, but an L was result of New Jersey Devils as they beat the Utah Hockey Club 3-0 in New Jersey. Again, as mentioned early in the program, before we got into any of this action, Mark Madden is on 105.90X right now, and he is up until the 6 o'clock hour of 105.90X, which is also the home of the best Pens coverage. You missed out on the show, Penguins fans. Be sure to check into the show wherever you get your favorite podcast, or do what the cool kids do and tweet at Mark Madden and see what you can get out of next week's show. Of course, when I say next week, I mean tomorrow's show, as it is a weekly show Monday through Friday. Mark Madden, 3 to 6 p.m. 105.9DX, 105.9DX, 3 to 6 p.m. Mark Madden. So still to come tonight, we have the 7 o'clock matchups between the Penguins and the Canadiens, the game we're getting you ready for. The Red Wings are getting ready to face the Rangers, and by the time you're about to hear this, we'll be also getting ready for the Islanders and the Avalanche. Islanders and the Avalanche game is a 9 o'clock start time on the Eastern time zone, and it is a 9 p.m. start time, which takes place at the Bell Arena. Right, so we're getting closer to the points where we can name the starting netminders and get you all caught up to speed on what has happened in the NHL, in the league. We are getting you up there. We got you Monday's action so far. Now, for those of us who sometimes fall behind, here's what happened on Sunday and Saturday into Friday. We're not going to get into Friday's program, but we are going to get into Saturday and Sunday's action that kicked off the end of the first week of the hockey season. And it all starts with the Golden Knights beating the Ducks 3-1 in the late night action against the Anaheim Ducks. The Anaheim Ducks fell to the Vegas Golden Knights 3-1, and the Edmonton Oilers, not much better for them. They lost 4-1 over the Calgary Flames. Dallas Stars outshot the Seattle Kraken and only scored 2 goals. Sam Steele and Wyatt Johnson with the goals on the season. Wyatt Johnson with his first goal of the season, and also comes as the game sealer for the program of this matchup against the Kraken. Again, the Winnipeg Jets beat the Wild 2-1, and of course the Kraken and the Stars had a game of only shutouts. Speaking of shutouts, here's the Saturday action. Of course, the Pittsburgh Penguins, you already know the score of that game, 4-2 in favor of the Maple Leafs, with Chris Letang getting his first goal on a PPG for PGH. And Ricard Raquel would come to try and save the game for the Pittsburgh Penguins and keep this as close as it was going to get with his first goal on the season when the Maple Leafs were up 3-2 on the game. Rather, 3-1, I should say. Kraken and the Minnesota Wild played on Saturday before the Kraken went to play the Dallas Stars and the Wild went to play the Winnipeg Jets. And both teams may have took the L on Sunday's action, but one team took the W, beating the Wild 5-4. That was the Seattle Kraken. The Philadelphia Flyers lose their opening matchup. I think it was the opening. I think this was the opening matchup for the Philadelphia Flyers. I could be wrong. I am indeed wrong because the first matchup for them was a Friday night game in which they took a victory in a shootout 3-2 over the Vancouver Canucks. They would lose 6-3 over the Calgary Flames, their second matchup of the season. Of course, the postponed game was the Hurricanes and the Lightning, which was supposed to go down on Saturday night, did not go down. We're looking for a reschedulement and seeing when that will be. While the Los Angeles Kings took an L to Trevor Moore's goal being the only goal of the game for the LA Kings over the Boston Bruins, as the Boston Bruins beat LA Kings, forcing overtime. And then David Pastrnak, with his third goal of the season, scores the game winner. Ducks end up shutting out the San Jose Sharks 2-0. The Oilers end up falling to the Connor Bedard team of the Blackhawks 5-2. The Blue Jackets end up taking care of business against the Colorado Avalanche 6-4. The Dallas Stars shut out the New York Islanders 3-0. The Devils end up winning against the Capitals 5-3. And of course, 6-5 victors. Rangers over the Utah Hockey Club is a victor for the Utah Hockey Club. The 5 is the Rangers. They lose that game, I should say. Panthers lose, but try to put it as close as it's ever going to get. Lose 5-2 over the Buffalo Sabres. And we've got the Canadiens, who are playing the Penguins right around the corner from now. 7:30 is the puck drop. We're getting you there. Quick reminder of that score. It was the Canadiens 4, the Senators 1, and the Canadiens are victorious in this one. And speaking of shutouts, the Red Wings, to end off our look at, were beating the Predators by 3 goals. And that's all she wrote on that one. Let's take a little bit of a 30-second timeout and get ready for the Penguins and the Canadiens. We do have some time to talk about the Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens on what the details are, but we don't have time for me to give you my thoughts in. It's going to be soon time to talk with Scott McGregor and get our keys to victory for the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins. And geez, we haven't talked about the starting goaltending matchup either, so that's still to come here on Penguins Pre-Show. I wish we had time to talk about my thoughts on the games, but we only have time to talk about a few games. So we're going to talk about that on the other side of Penguins Pre-Show, and we're going to get ready for Penguins and Canadiens coming up soon. Listening to Penguins Pre-Show, and we'll be right back right after this. Stay with us.
Take another look with Gerda Felix and Melanie Taddeo Malo, two powerful women of diverse backgrounds having genuine, unique, and uncomfortable conversations that everyone needs to have. Join Melanie and Gerda for conversations about what is missing from human connections.
Mike, happy Thanksgiving.
Gobble, gobble.
For listening to Penguins Hockey on the Sports for Beginners podcast. Sidney Crosby and the Pittsburgh Penguins play here. He shoots, he scores. Oh, what a save by Jari! Now, back to Penguins pre-show on Sports for Beginners, the podcast with Thomas McGregor. Happy Thanksgiving, Penguins Nation in Canada, and happy Thanksgiving from all of us at Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Get us into the show, Mike and Sully.
Mike, happy Thanksgiving. Gobble, gobble.
We couldn't have said it better ourselves. We are just hours away, or rather, now about 10 or 25 minutes away from puck drop on Penguins pre-show between the Canadiens and the Montreal Canadiens. Of course, when I say between the Canadiens, I mean the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens. That's what I mean. This is the Penguins pre-show, available on Sports for Beginners, the podcast, and only on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Talked about the hockey action that went on through Monday and Saturday, all the way up to Sunday's action in the NHL. But now let's get a look at what's going to happen in the later stages as we get to the starting netminders between the Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens. And of course, the netminders for the games upcoming in just a matter of minutes from now, with the New York Rangers taking on the Detroit Red Wings. The Detroit Red Wings are taking on the New York Rangers, and that game getting set to go in just about minutes from now. 7 p.m. puck drop time is the time of it dropping, and we will get ready for that game as well as get ready for our game that's happening around 30 minutes after 7 p.m., and that is indeed going to be Samuel Montebello versus Tristan Jarry. Get to a lot more of that starting netminders and go between the pipes of how the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens will line up in just a few seconds. But before we get to any of that, a reminder of the game that's going to get started in about a few minutes from now. It is the Pittsburgh Penguins' enemies who embarrassed them, the New York Rangers, taking on the Detroit Red Wings. And it looks like it will be Alex Lyon versus Igor Shesterkin. So coming up after a little bit of the reminder of who the game's goal minders for tonight's game at 9 p.m. Eastern time between the Islanders and the Avalanche. Get our thoughts from host of the program, Scott McGregor, who is host of the program of Penguins Postgame, coming up a little later after the game goes final. And he's also got you for on the gridiron, the Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets, as they're getting ready for an 8 o'clock matchup in MetLife Stadium between the New York Jets and, of course, the Buffalo Bills. It's Bills Postgame, which you can also hear on the ice and behind the benches amidst the beginning of the return of Penguins Wednesday hockey. I'll reveal more on that on the wraparound of Penguins pre-show. That's just around the corner from now. Scott's Keys to Victory is coming up. A reminder to stay tuned. The Penguins postgame also coming up. And of course, a look at when the next Penguins pre-show will be as well. Again, the goaltenders for tonight's game will be Tristan Jarry for the Pittsburgh Penguins, Samuel Montebello, and in the games we just talked about that's going to get going in a matter of moments from now, it is Igor Shesterkin versus Alex Lyon. So those are the matchups for those games, which are just getting set to go very, very soon. And very, very soon, getting ready to go around the 9 o'clock hour at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. It will be Alexander G versus Ilya Sorokin. It will indeed be Ilya Sorokin, or IS for short. IS for short will be taking on Alexander G for the Colorado Avalanche, who gets the netminder, and he'll be facing against IS, which is also known as Sorokin, the last name of the matchup. They're the last game to get going. Again, the final scores of the games we just talked about. Panthers losers to the Bruins 4-3. Oh, excuse me. Panthers winners to the Bruins 4-3. Excuse me. They had the win. The Ottawa Senators win it in overtime over the Los Angeles Kings 8-7. The Devils shut out the Utah Hockey Club 3-0 be the score for that game. And of course, now we await the final scores of tonight's game, the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins, the Detroit Red Wings and the New York Rangers, and the New York Islanders and the Colorado Avalanche. All right, it's almost time for the keys to the victory from our host of the program, Penguins Postgame, Scott McGregor. So this would be a perfect time to mention that on the Discord page of Sports for Beginners, Penguins fans and Montreal Canadiens fans, you can enter this as well. Be a perfect time to get game day ready and prepare yourself for the game and decide as you're watching the game who you think is going to stood out to you, who you think the 3 stars will be, and what kind of plays are you thinking about doing. Be sure to click over to the Discord page and put out those picks ahead of Penguins postgame, which comes your way right after the game goes final. Now, as we approach the keys to victory, let's just talk briefly about both teams and talk about where we see both teams. Now, I'm going to use just 2 games for each team and level them in. What were the games? Were they entertaining? Were they embarrassing? Were they bad? Were they great? Now, let's talk about the Red Wings against the Pittsburgh Penguins. That's going to be where we're starting first. We're going to start with the Penguins. And yes, there was a lot to talk about for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Milestone watch was a talk about it, and we're going to be talking about it on Penguins postgame. I'm hearing maybe some milestones get hit for the Penguins tonight. Maybe some milestones get missed for the Penguins tonight, but it is an 82-game season. We'll see where that all goes down. The final score of that game again, Penguins 6, Detroit 3. Here's how I see it. I thought the Red Wings and Penguins game, and I am a Maple Leaf fan, but I thought the Toronto Maple Leaf, the Detroit Red Wing game, and the Pittsburgh Penguins efforts to win that game against Detroit were good. Now, I know I said Toronto early on, but yes, I'm referring to the Maple Leafs as the second game we're going to talk about. I thought the efforts by the Penguins early on for that game were really, really good. Now, I agree with you, Pens Nation. We talk about the Rangers game. That was probably the game to forget in opener history for the Penguins. That was probably a game to forget. But again, that's how you start the season. You start the season on the losing train, and you're on your way to the winning train against Detroit. You pick up a W, and then you hope to pick up a W against the Maple Leafs. But honest to God, I don't think you really needed that W for the Penguins. And Steve Dangle mentioned it a little bit on the LFR for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Maple Leafs that coming a little close and coming close. And then, when you come close, he tells you that, our power play kind of sucked. And I kind of believe that. But instead of saying that it sucked, he did say it was kind of one of the things where you said, well, if the Penguins are going to get power plays and we're not going to get goals on the power play, that just says we need to work on things for the Maple Leafs. And it also said to me that we need the Penguins to stay away from the penalty kill so we can organize our power play and be ready for when the power play is ready to go. That way they don't see it coming. Maybe you guys will agree with me on that. Maybe you won't disagree with me on that. Either way, a win is a win and a loss is a loss. And I think no matter what game you saw the Penguins play in the first 3 games, I think both games were entertaining. Yes, you always hope to win those games, but it's very hard to do, especially even if you have to go into overtime with the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens tonight. We'll see what happens. The Montreal Canadiens, I'm going to let Scott's keys to victory take us over before we get to the Montreal thoughts, and then I'm just going to provide 2 thoughts on 2 games the Montreal Canadiens have played. I may mention the Maple Leafs, but we'll see where that goes. But right now, I'm going to give the floor to Scott McGregor, the host of Penguins Postgame. And then when we hear that he is done with his keys to victory, I'm going to hear what you want to hear for the Montreal Canadiens, and we'll send it out to Penguins post game, send you out to Penguins and Canadiens, and get you ready for the game. And I'll get my final thoughts in on what I think is going to happen tonight's game, even provide you with a little bit of a final score. So I hope you guys enjoy Penguins post game on the other side of this game. And we're going to get you a new edition of Penguins pre-show on the other side. First, Scott McGregor, take us out. What are your keys to victory? And let's get ready to find out what the keys to victory for our Montreal Canadiens or Pittsburgh Penguins win are. And then we'll wrap up the program with my thoughts on the Montreal Canadiens season so far before immediately wrapping up the show with my final thoughts. And the game itself is on its way. Penguins and Canadiens Thanksgiving Showdown puck drop is coming up. Stay with us. Scott McGregor, keep us in with this one and give us your keys to victory. Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. Welcome to your 3 keys to victory with Scott McGregor. That's myself. I am the host of Penguins Postgame. I'll be back with you right after the hockey game, but want to make you note that you will get both Penguins postgame and Bills postgame. Bills and the Jets right after Penguins and the Canadiens. Speaking of which, it's time for the 3 keys to victory for Pens versus Habs. That's the short form for the Montreal Canadiens. So we're going to do it as the keys to victory for the Pens to get a W against the Montreal Canadiens. All right, here we go. So, my keys to victory for a Pens victory against the Canadiens tonight. Number 1, be aggressive, but not too aggressive. You've seen what can happen when you're too aggressive and you tend to make mistakes that will end you in the penalty box. So I'm really looking forward, even if I can't watch the game on TV, I'm really looking forward to, as I hear the call on the radio, I'm really looking forward to hopefully the Penguins being a little extra careful when it comes to staying in and out of the penalty box. So I really hope the Pens do stay out of the penalty box. Number 2, I'm looking for like a better start from Tristan Jarry. So get the lead early, but be cautious with the lead. And number 3, defend the rush. Why do I say defend the rush? Well, you know how when teams don't defend the rush that well and it leads to goals against them? This is what I'm talking about. We have seen, even though we're in a new season and we haven't seen it much in the new season yet, but we have seen season after season after season when the Penguins have been caught not defending the rush. So I'm going to be paying extra close attention to when the Penguins give up an odd man rush. That's why my 3rd key to victory is defend the rush. What are the Penguins' keys to victory when they come out? Stay tuned if you're listening on the radio to find out what the keys to the game are. Brought to you by your neighborhood Ford stores in Pittsburgh. Tristan Jarry and Sam Montebello are the goalies we will talk about. But right now, that'll do it for me. Let's go back to Thomas to get you ready for puck drop. I'll see you after the game, Pens Nation. Let's go, Pens! Back to the show and back to Thomas in our studio. I'll be back with you after the game. Enjoy the hockey game, everybody. All right, great idea for some keys to victory. He will be with us for our next Penguins pre-show game. Before we get into the next Penguins pre-show and when that will be and take you into puck drop, it's time now to give in my 2 thoughts on the game with Montreal's performance so far. Again, both teams have played countless 3 games of this 82-game season. Here's number 4, and it's against each other. They will continue this series of games with a matchup in November on the 2nd of November, and they'll wrap it up on the Christmas break on December 12th, that is 2024, in Montreal. Kind of the same set where we are right now preparing for, which in just a matter of moments is getting ready to go for puck drop. Hopefully you join Scott for Penguins post game coming up immediately after the game, and I'm sure you're hoping it's going to be great. The Rangers are underway, their game's getting going, and we are getting you ready for Montebello, Jari, and the Penguins and the Canadiens. So here we go. Here are the thought process on the 2 games I'm going to talk about for the Montreal Canadiens. We already talked about the Pittsburgh Penguins, so now we're going to talk about the Montreal Canadiens and then wrap up the show on the other side by going between the pipes between Samuel Montebello and Tristan Jarry's line mates. Who's backing them up and who are they with on the forward line and the defensive line? That coming to wrap up the show when we continue on Penguins pre-show. But before we get to that final break, are some of my thoughts on the games between the Montreal Canadiens that they have played. And the first guy to speak of is the 6-4 losers game with Martin St. Louis losing to the Boston Bruins. Now, I think this game was a bit entertaining, just like the Toronto game was the Toronto game was a bit of a garbage game. I'll be honest, a bit of a garbage game, but that's my thoughts on it from a Leaf perspective. I really thought there was going to be more goals scored by Montreal or Toronto, if I'm being entirely honest with you. Again, I get it. It was the beginning of the season, but really I was expecting more from both teams, and that didn't seem to be the case for both teams. They do lose to the Boston Bruins, but they lose decently, having scored 4 goals and lose by at least 2 goals. 6-4 was the final. And then again, the last game I'm going to talk about is the Ottawa Senators. And this game I just thought was very entertaining for the Montreal Canadiens fans. I imagine, though, on the Ottawa Senators side of things, it was a different story. It felt like an embarrassment. It felt like, oh, well, we can only muster 1 goal, but you know what? It's Montreal. So, out you go, Ottawa. Let's see what happens on the other side of things for the Ottawa Senators. And speaking of the Ottawa Senators, they were in the games that have gone on today. I think they were in a game that went on today. Yes, they were. They beat the Kings 8-7 in favor of them. Again, Josh Norris with the overtime winner. That's going to do it for my thoughts on both teams for the Montreal Canadiens. We're going between the pipes to wrap up the program. Next, who are the forwards? Who are the defensemen? Who are the goaltenders being backed up with? And what will the score be? That, as we get you ready for Penguins hockey, is next when Penguins hockey continues on Sports for Beginners, and only on Sports for Beginners can you catch Penguins pre-show. Penguins pre-show wraps up on Sports for Beginners for the first time in this program. Next, stay with us. Win or lose, this is Monday Night Football on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. It's the Buffalo Bills versus the New York Jets on a Monday Night Football edition of Bills Postgame. Premiering right after the game, Scott McGregor has the answers for you. Who leads the division? Who had the best night? And who needs a little more work? This is Bills Postgame right after the game between the Bills and the Jets on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Love y'all, everybody. Take it one game at a time. All right, win all 3. 1, 2, 3, win. Touchdown, Buffalo. Looking for a good hockey podcast that covers your favorite hockey teams and mine? Check out On the Ice and Behind the Benches, where we chat about our favorite hockey teams, from puck drop to the last play of the action. To learn more, follow the On the Ice and Behind the Benches Facebook page. Search On the Ice and Behind the Benches. I hear the horn. That must mean it's time to get ready to send you off to Penguins hockey on 105.90X. And of course, wherever you could stream the game between the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins. It is Penguins pre-show on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Both teams are ready to get going, so you know what? It's time to go between the pipes and get ready for what I believe will be one of the best matchups we will see from the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins tonight at 7:30, 6:30 Eastern Time, 6:30 Central Time, 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 p.m. tonight on the east side. Kick things off with Montreal's lines and combinations and figure out who they're putting up against Pittsburgh's lines and combinations through the first, second, third, and fourth lines to get into defenses. So it will be indeed Cole Caulfield with Nick Suzuki and JS will get the start in the right wing. They'll be followed by Joel Ermia, Kirby Dack, Alex Newhook on the second line. We'll have Jake Evans with Brendan Gallagher and Josh Anderson on the third line of forwards. Christian Dvorak is with Oliver Kapanen and Emil Heidemann. Emil Heidemann will have our fourth line of forwards to speak of for the Montreal Canadiens. They'll be paired up with on defense with Mike Matheson and Caden G. Caden G will get the defensive pairings with Nick Suzuki, Cole Caulfield, and JS. So Caden G and Mike Matheson are the first defensive pairs for that. David Savard and Lane Hudson have you on the second defensive alignment for the second line of forwards in Alex Newhook, Kirby Dack, and Joe Amora. If I'm saying that right. Joel A. I'll say Joel A. AX will also go with Justin Barron. Justin Barron and AX will have you for the third line with Jake Evans, Brendan Gallagher, and Josh Anderson. They will be your defensive pairings for the Montreal Canadiens, and they'll consist of a backup for Samuel Maltembello in Caden P, Cayden Primeau, who wears number 30. Out for this game, we've got David Rinbacher, Patrick Liney, and on the IR still we have Raphael Harvey Pinard for the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadian forwards will face the line of Anthony B, Sidney Crosby, Brian Rust, Ricard Raquel, Evgeny Malkin, Michael Bunting, Drew O'Connor, Lars Eller, Jesse Puljavari, Noel Achari, Cody Glass, Kevin Hayes, and the defensive pairings for the first three lines will be Matt G, Chris Letang, 65 in EK, Marcus Pedersen, Ryan Shea, and Ryan Graves. Tristan Jarry in net against Samuel Maltembello, and he'll be backed up by Joel Blomqvist. Out for the season, or rather still on the IR, we have Matthew Neto, Alex Nedeljkovic and Blake Luzetto. Blake, Alex, and Matthew, alongside Raphael Harvey, Pinyard, Patrick Lyon, and David Reinbacher, are out for both the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens. Oh my goodness, time flies so fast. My goodness me, my goodness me. It is about time to wrap up the show. So once again, the goaltenders for both the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Montreal Canadiens feature in backup Joel Blomqvist, Hayden P, and the goaltenders for tonight we have Samuel Maltembello and Tristan Jarry for the Pittsburgh Penguins. We're on our way to puck drop, but Rangers fans who are tuning into this on the Sports for Beginners podcast, stay right with me on the ice and behind the benches, because I'll be covering the Red Wings and the New York Rangers, the New York Rangers and the Red Wings will kickstart a brand new season of hockey and also a brand new edition of Rangers postgame. And this time we're going to see how far we can go through with it. I'll join you after the Rangers and Red Wings game. I hope you're enjoying the hockey game if you took a second to tune into Penguins pre-show. And with that being said, as we hit 7:25 p.m. right now, it looks like it is go time, which means we are out of time for this edition of Penguins pre-show, but Penguins postgame is coming up on the other side of it. As you heard on Penguins Keys to Victory from Scott McGregor, Buffalo Bills fans, we invite you to join us for Bills postgame as Double Trouble has returned on the program. Double Trouble features the New York Jets versus the Buffalo Bills. That game getting ready to get going for a Monday night at MetLife Stadium. And of course, as we are preparing you for the game and wrapping up, a pre-show for Penguins hockey, we're getting you set for, of course, the Bills and the Jets will kick off at 8:15, but coming up in just a matter of minutes from now at 7:30, 6:30 Pacific, 6:30 Central, 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 p.m. East. It's the Penguins and the Canadiens. I have been your host for Penguins pre-show, Thomas McGregor, and I hope you all enjoy the content. Bills Mafia, if you're tuning in to Penguins pre-show and you're tuning in to Penguins postgame and you're tuning in to Bills football later, I invite you, and I know Scott will invite you, to join us for Bills and Jets. After the game, it's Bills postgame, Monday Night Football edition. Once again, happy Thanksgiving to all of our listeners in Canada, and happy Thanksgiving to the American people, as the American Thanksgiving is just around the corner. And so is another Christmas edition of Sports for Beginners, the podcast as well. Scott's got you the rest of the way, Penguins Nation, for Penguins postgame. Enjoy that show, and let's go Pens. But with that being said, our next Penguins pre-show will be ahead of the Penguins' next hockey game, not featuring the Buffalo Sabres, but rather featuring the Carolina Hurricanes. We will talk about the Buffalo Sabres, but we will be talking about the Carolina Hurricanes as well, getting you ready for that game. You'll even get my thoughts on tonight's contest between the Montreal Canadiens and the Pittsburgh Penguins. But until I see you again for Penguins pre-show with the Hurricanes in town against the Pittsburgh Penguins, that is it for this one. Thank you very much for tuning in to Penguins Hockey on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Keep it tuned for Scott McGregor on Penguins postgame later after the game. If you like what you've been listening to on this show and you want us to continue it, please leave a like, a comment is welcome, feedback is welcome, and I will see you all, Penguins Nation, on Friday, October 18th, for the Carolina Hurricanes and the Pittsburgh Penguins, as we prepare you for that game on the next Penguins pre-show on Sports for Beginners, and only on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. Before I go, and as I sign off, want to remind you that if you miss out on any of the Penguin post-game shows, please join us on the Ice and Behind the Benches Wednesday, October 23rd, before the Penguins get ready to face Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. We get you all caught up to speed with every single game leading up to Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. Once again, that is Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. Penguins Wednesday Hockey returns on the Ice and Behind the Benches, the podcast, giving you a recap of the games that you may have missed out on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. And Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024 is when Penguins Wednesday Hockey returns on the Ice and Behind the Benches, the podcast. With that being said, enjoy the hockey, everybody. Go Pens, go. And I look forward to seeing you all Friday against the Hurricanes at PPG Paints Arena. Tee up Pens and Hurricanes on Friday, October 18th, 2024 at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. We will talk to you then. Enjoy the hockey. I'm out. Love one another. And from outside the Penguins pre-show until Friday, have a great week, everyone. And let's go Pens. Closing message, take us out of here. You've been listening to Pittsburgh Penguins hockey on the Sports for Beginners podcast. Penguins pre-show returns Friday ahead of the Carolina Hurricanes and the Pittsburgh Penguins. So remember, when you see us next Friday on Sports for Beginners with Thomas McGregor, the host, win or lose, we're preparing you for the game and getting you ready for Penguins postgame after the game. That's on its way next. If you'd like to learn more about the show or when upcoming episodes come available on Sports for Beginners, please check out the Sports for Beginners Facebook page. Search Sports for Beginners or send us an email at sportsforbeginnerspod8231@gmail.com. That's sportsforbeginnerspod8231@gmail.com. See you Friday, Pens Nation. Enjoy the hockey.